whence I come, this is my home up until I was about 6 years of age. Poor family, living in Lumberton, North Carolina, a little town called Gavintown, which is a community, about 15 families, 15 to 20 families on a dirt road, outdoor toilets. So we were extremely poor. Don't have any pointers, but you see, I did have my little red wagon back in the back, and this is me here at 4 years old with my little cousin. And
Are you operating there?
hmm?
Are you operating?
Operate.
Looks like you're
I might
operating.
be. But anyway, that's where it all started, and little house there is no longer standing. Hurricane Hazel came through. I remember that very vividly. And this house is sitting on bricks, as you can see. And my grandmother and I, who raised me until I was age 6 years of age, could feel the house just being elevated like this, and we thought we were in the land of Oz and get ready to fly off to the land of Oz. But that was a very frightening time for me as I guess I was probably 4 or 5 years old then as well. But fortunately, this is my father, James Graham Sr., strict military man. The quarter would bounce off my bed. I kept his shoes shined, and he kept me in line. And it really helped my family to elevate ourselves out of poverty when he went to the military. He joined the military in 1943, fought in all the world wars, World War II, Korean War, Vietnam, old master sergeant. And I can still remember those days. He never got a whooping. All he had to do was just look at me. And I knew what I had to do, no questions asked. But anyway, James Graham, he died in 1995 after 26 years in the military, and developed multiple sclerosis at the age of 45. At the age of 48, he was flat on his back with multiple sclerosis. My mom took care of him at home, which was a wonderful woman. Refused to put him in any type of nursing home or facility, and he lived home with my mother until his death at the age of 66. And matter of fact, Dan, I was out at a meeting, and we had our SGO meeting in San Francisco several years, and I was going to be doing a presentation on radical hysterectomies and so forth. And I got a call, and Dan came to me. I think you told me that I'd gotten this call, but no one could find me. My father had passed, so I missed that meeting. I left and flew back home. But anyway, he was a good man. Certainly, between he and my mother, they made me who I am. I traveled around the world, standpoint to going from military base to military base, Germany, all over, and that helped to expand my knowledge of the world. Travel is an education, and it made me the kind of person that I feel comfortable with dealing with anyone. And my experience allowed me to, the South was segregated. I'd always gone to segregated schools, and when military was quite different from the standpoint, particularly when I went to Germany. That was my first time sitting in a classroom with white individuals, and I grew during that 3 years I spent there in Germany. But anyway, I always planned to go to college. Being an only child, I pretty much had what I wanted and no competition. So I was planning to go to college, and obviously difficult to get into the white universities back in this time unless you were, 4.0 student, almost a genius. And so I went to a historically black college and in North Carolina Central in Durham, North Carolina. And that's where most things I found most interesting about that history of the South is that to prevent integration back in the 50s and 40s, blacks are, we're very intelligent people, as you know, and but if you had academic, you did well academically, the state would send you away to another medical school, to Howard and Meharry, rather than allow you to go into University of North Carolina, North Carolina State, whatever. But I didn't remember. States that did that was Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, and North Carolina. And I thought that amazing, that here's you paying taxes and so forth to keep you from going to an in-state school, which I had the opportunity to do. They would ship you off to pay a much higher fee for you to go elsewhere than to stay in the state that you were born and raised. But anyway, I went to North Carolina Central from high school, and at North Carolina Central, historically black college, this man tremendously changed my life. Dr. Vernon Clark just died recently. That was his tenure at North Carolina Central, was from 1958 to 2009. Brilliant man. Molecular biologist, trained at Chapel Hill, got his PhD from Chapel Hill, came back to North Carolina Central, and he accounted for essentially most of the Afro-Americans leaving that institution, going to medical school, dental school, higher levels than just a college degree. He created a little group. You were invited into this group, and I was invited into this group my second year taking biology. I was a biology and chemistry major. And he taught us, he just made science seem so simple. Some people have the ability to break things down, that regardless to what your knowledge is, you understand. And that was his ability. Matter of fact, he was the governor's school of North Carolina there in Laurinburg for high school students. He was over that program for several years because he had that unique talent of being able to explain things, theories and so forth. But anyway, we gathered as a group of students who graduated from med school and dental school and gave him this bus at a big celebration of his life just before he died. And he has a wing at North Carolina Central in the biology building that was dedicated to his research and things that he had done. And I went to his lab, and in the afternoons and on the weekends I worked in his lab. I was destined to go in the direction you went, as you'll see, but things throw you off, and we'll talk about that. After being at North Carolina Central, Civil Rights Act was passed in 1964. Schools had to integrate all around the country. Duke and Vanderbilt were the last two schools, private schools, schools in general in the South, to integrate. And that did not happen until medical school. And that was in 1966. And other thing here was that in medical school, I'm a product of affirmative action. Affirmative action works. No way I would have gotten into Duke or Carolina if things had stayed the way they were. 10 of us, that's 100 medical students. Carolina would admit one black student maybe once a year or once every other year. And you really had to be, a top-notch student to get admitted to either Duke, and Duke didn't admit any, to get into one of their residency programs. And so 10 of us went in, 8 of us were from historically black colleges around Carolina, Howard University, North Carolina Central, Livingston College, Johnson C. Smith. There were two characters, two blacks in our group that were from white institutions, and that was Bob Reddick, and he went to undergraduate school at University of North Carolina. And then we had another fellow who was at North Carolina State. But the other 8 of us were from historically black colleges. And at 10%, if you did not integrate your medical schools, you were not going to get any federal funds. So in 1970, all around the United States, a wave of blacks going into medicine happened because the doors were opened up for us to go in, and they had to meet that quota of 10%. So it was 100 students, 10 of us were black. The good thing is we all graduated on time. All graduated on time in 4 years. And I had some experience with Dr. Clark working in his lab, and I got introduced to Dr. Roberts and Dr. Brinkhouse at North Carolina, University of North Carolina Medical School. And that changed my life again. Dr. Roberts was my mentor in medical school, and I worked in the laboratory during the summers and on weekends during the regular year. And Carolina had probably the most powerful program in the country related to coagulation. Hemophilia, von Willebrand's disease, all of the blood disorders. If you have that, people referred in from all over the country to Chapel Hill to care for the hemophiliacs and so forth. You really wanted to get the best of care. And I got involved in that, and they put me in the lab and they put me on a project. And the project was determined to try to care. Von Willebrand disease is a very rare disease of coagulation. And so no one had no treatment for it. Antibodies, didn't have any treatment, whatever medications or anything. It was a bad disease to have. And so I spent most of the time working on characterizing the antibody that created this disease, caused this disease, in von Willebrand's disease. So we essentially did that, characterized this.
Hey James, which one of those was yours?
Huh?
Where
You
were you
didn't-
in that thing?
Oh, you
You
want
gotta show us.
Yeah.
And any other
Okay.
Yeah, there aren't a whole lot of women in that.
No,
picture,
we had one black female in our group, and out of the 10, but again, women. But here I am here. This is the era of the bush. Different generations go through different, things. Young people today is dreadlocks with blacks. Identity is black and so forth. Back then, it was the afro, and everybody had an afro, pretty much, as you can see. Where am I here? Somewhere. You should be. Oh yeah. Mine was always lopsided. It was always patterned. And didn't have a mirror, so the thing was lopsided all the time. But anyway. Huh?
Any other Duke connections in your class?
Did I have a Duke what?
Any
Connections.
other Duke connections? in that
Anybody
class?
else there went to Duke? Or?
No, I'm not aware of anyone else that went. There was Duke guys who graduated. This was the class of. There were several individuals that went to Duke from the standpoint. One fellow went to the school, went to neurology, internal medicine. He wanted to be a neurologist. So there were some individuals that left this class and went to Duke.
Suchu and Swain were not in your
Huh?
class. Suchu and Swain were not in your class.
Tom
Tom
Sucher.
Tom Sucher.
They'll be ahead of
But Tom Sucher.
Was not in your class.
Well, no, that's at Duke.
No, he was a Carolina
Yeah.
graduate.
Yeah,
No,
but he-
okay. No, he wasn't in my class because Tom was ahead of me. I'll talk about Tom, but Tom was a year ahead of me. So he was not in my class. And I didn't know Tom when I was at Carolina either. But we stayed together for the most part, and as I said, I started doing this research and learned a lot about, like Andy, research and running all the techniques and so forth. And what they gave me the opportunity, and I was just shocked. I was a second-year medical student, so once we characterized this antibody, I'd go over to Dr. Roberts' office to write the paper 5 o'clock in the morning, and we'd sit there and we'd write this paper as to what we've done. It was a big breakthrough, von Willebrand's disease. And he said, you know what, Jim, I'm gonna let you be the first author. I was shocked. I'm a second-year medical student. This is a major breakthrough in a major disease. And he said, well, I want you to present this at the International Hematology Society meeting in New York at the Waldorf Astoria. I'm shocked. I said, my goodness. So he knew I was nervous type and so forth. He says, Jim, don't worry, you'll do fine. Take this Valium. So I took 5 milligrams of Valium and I walked up on that stage and I knocked it out. No problem. But anyway, that catapulted my career in medicine was this one paper that I was first author on. I traveled around the country talking about this coagulation von Willebrand's disease. This was presented at the Student American Medical Association. They have residents go and give their presentations once a year, some of the things that they've done, and this won awards when I went there and did that. So I was really high on the, after that second year. And I continued to work, and they put me on the path to be a pathologist. Brinkhouse was a world-renowned pathologist, and he respected me, and I respected him, and they worked with me and Dr. Roberts very closely, so I was either going to be a hem-onc guy or pathologist, was what I was planning to do. Until my third year of medical school. And what happened in my third year of medical school, I'd already decided I was going into pathology. I set my applications out during that summer, that third year of medical school. A group of doctors, which was unusual. This was the first, boy, I'm having trouble with balance these days too. This old age is not playing. But anyway, 10 black doctors in Charlotte, North Carolina, created a multi-specialty group. This is not uncommon in whites, but this is the first multi-specialty group of black physicians in the South. And they bought a city block of Charlotte and built a 9-story building, and every surgery, radiology, obstetrics, primary care, internal medicine. And they knew I was from Charlotte, and they asked me to come there for the summer and just kind of rotate through their practices to make a decision as to what I was going to do. There was no pathologist. And I pretty much decided, well, I'm doing pathology, but it'll be a good experience just to see what clinical medicine is like. So I went there and did that for that summer, and I ran into Leslie Walton. People at Chapel Hill know who Leslie Walton is. He was trained at Downstate in New York. There were probably about 10 black GY oncologists in the country at that time. And Leslie was one of those 10, trained by James Nelson. Jim Nelson out of New York at Downstate. He had trained essentially 90% of the Afro-Americans who became GY oncologists at that point. There was one trained at Memorial that many of you might remember. He just recently died, I find out, and that was Walter Jones, trained with the program there at Sloan Kettering. But that was it. And so I met Leslie, and I was so impressed with this guy. His technique in surgery, I was a medical student. I'd go to the operating room with him and so forth, and he would say, Jim, let me tell you one thing. He said, if you're interested in gynecology, you just can't be a gynecologist. I said, what you talking about? He said, it's better if you're black, you need to be overtrained. It's better to be overtrained than undertrained. And you hold on to that. If you want to do what I'm doing, or if you even want to be a general gynecologist, do a fellowship anyway. It's best, blacks always had the thought process that we had to be 10 times better than whites in order to get ahead in the world. And that stuck with me. And I was so impressed with him, I left after that summer, canceled all my applications for pathology, and started applying to OB-GYN programs around the country. And a fellow by the name you all might remember him, Bob Brain, was at Chapel Hill. Another thing was unused that helped us out as Afro-Americans at Chapel Hill. James Taylor's father became the dean of the medical school at Carolina. And you were most deans, and at that stage of time, you were very stiff, collars and suits and sport. Didn't dress down. He came in with a ponytail, sandals, and changed the whole curriculum of the medical school there at Chapel Hill. He said, I don't want any of you guys in school after 12 o'clock. Before it was a 9 to 5 type thing, or 8 to 5. This curriculum, you're going to be out every day by 12 o'clock. You might have some labs you might need to go to do some things, but there's no didactics in it. Nothing goes on after 12 o'clock. And for the Afro-Americans, that gave us a big break. Because what we did is that we'd finish there, and we as a group worked together to try to, do the best we could to keep up And that allowed us to be able to do that and get sleep at night. And so normally, you know, at medical school, you stay in class all day, you work all night from the standpoint of trying to do all the things you needed to do. And perhaps that was a blessing. So anyway, we went from there, and Bob Brame, Duke stole Bob Brame from Chapel Hill. And Dr. Parker was from Carolina. He went to Carolina under, you know, medical school and all that as well. So they had that connection. So Bob was going over to Carolina, over to Duke. And Bob asked me, because I did well in the surgical rotations as well as all of the OB-GYNs, how would you like to go to Duke with me? I said, Duke? That was not even in my vocabulary. And he said, yeah, Duke. So that's how I became the first Afro-American to be at Duke, was that I came along with Bob Brame. And Bob was a great guy. He didn't stay at Duke long. He was all over. He didn't stay many places very long. He stayed for 4 or 5 years. He'd go somewhere else, and he's all over. East Carolina, and down in Greenville. I followed his career over in Raleigh. Always a good guy, though. And but anyway, that took me into Duke, and I was at Duke from 74 through 78. And as I say, I have fond memories of Duke. Going in there, can't recall anybody who treated me in a negative way because I was black. Being perfectly honest, I was equal to the other 6 other residents that were involved. And that was one of the things that didn't click with me until later on. Duke admitted 7 residents that year. Next year they took 6. The year after that they took 6. The year after that they took 6. They've taken 6 always. And I said, well, I wonder why they took 7 residents. Nobody really expected me to make it, I assume. I mean, this, you know, you got to think what happened there. Dr. Moore, which I'll talk about now, I guess, as well, came to Duke in '68. School didn't get integrated until '66, and he became a clinical faculty member there. And he was my next mentor and role model. It's important when you're to have somebody that looks like you. It just made me feel more comfortable, and he was good. It was someone that, you know, I could look at, the residents respected. Everybody wanted to scrub with Dr. Moore. And he could do a C-section faster than anybody in town. I don't know how quickly it was. It might have been 10 minutes from skin to skin. Baby out, in and out and out. And surgically, he was a great surgeon. And loved personality, and residents just loved to scrub with him. So we had a major loss when we lost Don. I guess it was colon cancer at premature age, like 45 or something like that. But he was a great guy. He was a role model for me. And he bought a partner in somewhere around 1970, 1976, I guess, after I'd been there for a couple of years. And y'all probably remember Dr. Avant was his partner, and he left and ultimately went down to Rocky Mountain. That's where he went. But, you know, those are the positive things that I could see. And the other positive thing, before I get to anything that, you know, is I can speak of. And most of you remember, you no longer have the buffalo for this.
Oh, yes, we do.
You still have the buffalo?
We got many buffalo in this.
Oh my goodness, I didn't realize that. I thought it was, I didn't think it was legal, you know, just all the HIPAA laws and so forth. But anyway,
It's a politically correct buffalo.
along Parham, you know, obviously Duke had a strong faculty, probably one of the strongest faculties in the country. You had Bill Creasman, Roy Parker, Charles Hammond. All these were icons in endocrinology with, you know, with Dr. Hammond. You had Parker, you know, just great vaginal surgery, repair work, and all this stuff. You had Bill Creasman. You had Dr. Addison came back ultimately, but these were Dr. Charlie Peet. Never will forget Dr. Charlie Peet.
Absolutely.
This guy was a technician, I mean, like a machine. when it comes to, on every Friday, he'd bring these patients in. You wouldn't touch it, you'd scrub in, but he wouldn't let you do any. But the technique was so smooth, and he was just a quiet man, just did a wonderful job from the standpoint of teaching. Remember him, Steve? And we've lost him too. But anyway, the Buffalo, you all know I was going to tell you how the Buffalo works. But anyway, Malone Parham, which is a fellow who was also interested in oncology, was going to be a GYN oncologist. He knew I wanted to be a GYN oncologist. He was a year ahead of me, and boy, he just kind of took me under his wing. Jim, you got to do this. You know, you got to have that resume. You got to have this. You got to learn how to do this. So we became good friends, and he was the Buffalo, and he made me Buffalo. So I became Buffalo, and then I passed it on to Dan, and Dan passed it on to Ken Forty. But never will. Malone was, he was like Dr. Parker, that southern accent, gentleman and so forth, always joking. He started joking to me about being black and this type thing, and eating chitlins and all this kind of stuff. So I had Dan, Malone, and all over for dinner at my house. And I put some chitlins in there. And I made him eat those chitlins. So that was a lot of fun. But anyway, that was a great time that we had at that point. And then we've got the Magnificent Seven.
Hardy.
And 7 of them, I just still think about that. They never asked why.
I can tell you why.
You know why?
Yeah.
What? I don't.
Yeah. Well, I was had just come back and getting my PhD, and had a good relationship with Roy, Dr. Parker, as a second-year medical student. And I met him on the elevator about March. And
Speak up.
And so I met Dr. Parker on the elevator when I was now in my 4th year medical school. And Dr. Parker and I had agreed that I was going to be a resident. And he said, well, when are you coming back and being a resident? I said, well, this coming June. This is March now. So he said, come by my office in about an hour. And he called somebody, and we had 7 residents.
So Arnie was the afterthought, not you.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I've known all these years, and I've known all these years, and I never said anything. That's the other thing, another point I bring up, I never said anything, but all these years, I've always thought, I said, you know, I can't explain this. Why?
Well, now
You
you
know,
know.
It's always.
Dr. Parker did a lot of things in the elevator, let me tell you.
Exactly. So that was one of the things I was saying that was a negative, was the fact that, hey, why did you bring 7 residents in? Thank you, honey. He never told me that.
There you go.
Well,
We were good buddies.
They punished me that I got to be the only resident as an intern to be on oncology. So I was an intern on oncology. But yeah, he said, just come by my office in about an hour.
Yeah, you know all these guys. Chris Wilson was probably the most academic guy in the group, you know, like Dr. Hammond and so forth. We lost Norman, a good friend of mine as well. We all became great friends. And John, do they still make the pictures like this, or the little plaques for you?
They have real
That depicts your
not very-
personalities?
No personnel.
And so Dominic had Porsches, and matter of fact, he sold CP a Porsche and all this kind of stuff, sailing, he did all that stuff. Then you had Mary Hammond, just common, I think she was from Chapel Hill. Was she from Chapel Hill too? I don't know if she was from Chapel Hill, I don't recall. But then you had this fella here, Peter Larson, he was cool, he was from one of the Flower Kids. You know, he was cool and calm, had his, you know, just a very nice guy from Portland, Oregon. And everybody knows Steve Scott. Steve, I was sitting in Chicago looking at 60 Minutes, and boom, they had Steve Scott on 60 Minutes. I said, what in the world is that? And they had Steve, and you know, he created this empire from down the Atlantic Coast board, the Atlantic Coast, he and Bert. And funny, they got something about, they were doing something from the standpoint, you know, our 60 Minutes tried to, this guy's worth $400 million. I said, oh my God. So I learned that in Chicago. And then you got Arnie. You got the little lightning boats. I've always called him, you know, he's behind us constantly moving. Constantly. Has always been that way. But anyway, that was great to do that. And then there's Dr. Parker. Boy, was he a gentleman. A Southern gentleman for sure. I'm from the South, so I mean, I just, the accent, you know, just authoritarian on everything, you know, and he just kind of spoke with authority on anything you talked about subject-wise. And there are three things about Dr. Parker I'd like to say that really had an impact on me. One, we had the private diagnostic clinic, okay? And in this private diagnostic clinic, he'd take residents, you'd be on that rotation, you'd go with him and see his private patients. So I never will forget, I walk in this room with him with this patient. And the patient jumps up and looks at me. He's not gonna be in this room when you examine me. And you're like, Dr. Parker, fell back. Madam, you can put your clothes on and leave this office right now. Walked out and shut the door. That was impactful. I said, my goodness, what is his private patient? Oh. Then the other thing that he did that I remember that was had a great impression. One of the first thing is that in residence, Steve Scott wanted to do GY oncology, and I wanted to do GY oncology, and both of us wanted to stay at Duke. So Bill said, you guys, for your fourth year, Jim, you do the first 2 months, Steve, you do the next 2 months, and I'll decide what we're going to do. So I worked like a dog that was the summer, July, August, and so forth. Then Steve went in, and we were competitive, but we respected one another. So to shock both of us, Bill said, well, didn't say anything. Next thing we knew, John Curry was coming from private practice out of Chapel Hill. I said, my goodness, what happened? So I had to, I went for interviews anyway. So fellow James Nelson, as I mentioned, they trained all these black guys. This was a Jewish fellow at the University of Iowa. And Brinkhouse was from Iowa. So when I went in and asked Brinkhouse to write me a letter of recommendation, even though I was a Duke, I knew he had those connections there. He said, Jim, you write it and I'll sign it. And that was pressure. I said, oh my goodness, what do you say, how can you be, boastful about yourself? But anyway, it took Sadie and I a couple of weeks to put that letter together. But anyway, I was admitted to, he accepted me to the program at the University of Iowa in oncology, and Bucksbaum was a great GYN oncologist as well. And so I got accepted, but then rolled around February, and I got a call from Dr. Bucksbaum, and he said, James, he said, I'm sorry to tell you this, but I'm not going to be at Iowa, I'm leaving. So therefore, I'm going to have to cancel, and there'll be no one here for you to do GYN oncology with. That was devastating. This is February, matching all that comes out, March, April, and most people are committed to oncology anyway as to who they were taking. So this is when I went to Dr. Parker. I sat there in his office, and this was just, this was very stuck with me as well. I have a picture on my wall of this man today. I said, Dr. Parker, I said, I don't know what I'm going to do. I said, Dr. Bucksbaum is no longer going to be at Iowa, and I don't want to go into private practice. I've always planned to do an oncology fellowship. Jack Rampone was there and all this stuff. He had impressed me. And so he said, he looked at me and he put his hand on my shoulder and looked down. He said, son, don't you worry. I'll find you a place. And a little tear ran down his cheek. I said, good gracious. So, sure enough, about a week later, I get a call from Bucksbaum. Bucksbaum says, Jim, you want to go down to Texas with me? I said, what's in Texas? He said, I'll be at Southwestern Medical School. They don't have an oncology program, but you come and spend a year in the lab with some of the guys there, and I will be up and rolling for your 2 years of clinical and after a year in the lab. That was a break for me. I said, my goodness, I've been working hard, medical school, residency, so I got a chance to go into the lab 9 to 5 and shake tubes and do chromatography and all this stuff that you've been doing, and got some papers. The thing is that University of Texas, like Parkland, where I went for this, Kennedy and all this, now it's just a totally different place now. You just wouldn't recognize it. All the buildings with all these millionaire Texans' names on buildings all around Parkland. This building. But anyway, Texas Instruments, Paul McDonald was on an airplane flying first class and set by the Cecil Ider and Cecil Green. And he was telling about what he was doing at Southwestern. And the guy wrote out a $5 million check. And they built a building there just for research. Ider and Cecil Green Center there for the OB-GYN department. 12 PhDs, nothing but research on gynecologic topics. So I got the chance to go into the lab and work with these guys and learn all about cell culture and all these type things. And Paul McDonald, they had, in the Green Journal every month was just, Southwestern Medical School. Pridgett was there, the father, I guess you could say, the Bible for obstetrics. Norm Gant, Paul McDonald. I just left a program with Power and come into a situation like this. My God, it was amazing. So it was a wonderful experience. So program was approved after 1 year, and I started my 2-year fellowship, again, pioneering. But the thing that was so interesting and was so great about our training at Duke, we were good vaginal surgeons. I could do a vaginal hysterectomy with my eyes closed, do an anterior posterior repair, all this kind of stuff with no problem. And they weren't good at that at Dallas. So all the residents, anytime they got a vaginal case, they thought, hey, Dr. Graham, would you scrub in with me? Would you scrub in? So I was doing so many vag his down there in between my oncology stuff with the residents that it was just amazing. But it made me feel good that they wanted to scrub with me because of to learn this technique that we had been taught at Duke. But anyway, I spent that time there for 3 years, wonderful years there at Duke, at Parkland as well. And then I finished my fellowship, and where do I go? And always Duke. You all remember Dr. Will Banks. Dr. Will Banks was chairman at Rush University in Chicago, and he took me in. I had an option. Remember Earl Surrick? Earl was another great GYN oncologist out in Arizona. Earl asked me to come out and join him. And Sadie and I went out there, and she looked around. She said, well, where's the grass? And Earl said, you painted like that yard over there. And so that just put a nail into that coffin. We weren't going to Arizona. Hot and scorpions and didn't like little creatures and so forth. So we went to join George Wilbanks in Chicago. So I spent about 10 years there with George, and great experience there with him. We had 5 GYN oncologists. I was the third one, like Curtis came. Second, we had a third one, then we brought in 2 more since then, and we were all over Chicago. South side, north side, and George told me, well, we might need to get us a helicopter. I said, no joke. But each person had his hospital, base was Rush, and this type thing. And then when CP came, to Illinois, the University of Illinois, he had a partner over there, and both of them were good, doing a great job and so forth. But CP left, and his partner stayed there for a couple of years, and then I became the director of GYN oncology over at the University of Illinois, and still kept my base there at Rush Presbyterian. But I stayed there for about 10 years, and had a wonderful time. Residency program was strong. Probably the strongest nursing schools in the country was at Rush Presbyterian. If you had a degree and your master's or PhD from Rush, you were pretty much set in nursing. It's a great program, and so this is Phil Desaya at our research day. We'll always invite George, the same tradition we have here at Duke, Residence Day. They present their research papers and so forth. And Phil Desaya was the guest this year. This is my partner, Ed Yodan. See that fellow there, and George, we were the 3 there at the time, and just a great experience there in Chicago. Not only that, Arthur, I don't know whether they were trying to get me to go to the University of Chicago or whatever, but I got a call from Arthur Hertz. You all might not. He's a famous GYN and college chairman of the Department of Chicago. University of Chicago.
Yes.
Jim said, "Have you ever heard People of People?" I said, "No." He said, "How would you like to go with me to the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe to look at their healthcare system?" And he was taking several areas. I was going to be the GYN colleges. He got a couple of people doing reproductive endocrinology, and we were going to go and look at the healthcare systems in those various countries, Finland, Sweden, and the Soviet Union. So I went, and boy, was that an education. This is where I was at the Radium Hemmet in Stockholm in 1985 with Arthur Hertz and so forth. And, that hospital radiation, that's where the foundation for radiation therapy in gynecology started in 1906. And Earl Surik had gone and spent time there and got part of his training there from the standpoint of just the radiation. Earl was big into radiation. But anyway, that was a great experience. And Soviet Union, it was like a third world country. I didn't make pictures of that, but I wish I could have. But the thing that struck me, walked into the maternal hospital. I've forgotten how many deliveries, maybe 25, 30,000 deliveries a year at this particular hospital, and walked in, and they had one fetal monitor. One. Everything was done by hand. And I walked by this room, huge room. Must have been 100 women just laying under lights, stripped, butt naked. And what that was, the bilirubin. I guess they just did it to everybody. They had that problem where your bilirubin postpartum will become elevated and so forth. And I said, my goodness, it was just arcade. Men could not enter the hospital unless you were a doctor. So you would deliver a baby, and the women would have to, and it's cold in the Soviet Union, open the window and hold the baby out so the dads could see. And I had pictures. I said, my goodness, this is really weird. But anyway, it was like a third world country. So I see how the Soviet Union failed. They were trying to keep up us with the technology and their army, but the people were suffering. They were like they were in a third world country. So physicians were paid the same thing as the broom sweeper in the street. Just by being a physician didn't give you any special priority. The doctor, what was his name? Great GYN oncology, visited this country. I can't pull that name up. But anyway, we saw him we went in and did a radical hysterectomy with him. Operating room, anesthesia, hand, everything. Blood pressure every few minutes. Instruments, he had about 5 instruments on the table, but we have hundreds of instruments. He had about 5 instruments on the table, but he did that radical his in about an hour and 15 minutes, an hour and a half. He could cut. It was good. Bowman. You remember Dr. Bowman?
No, B-O-H-M-A-N-N.
What is it?
Bowman.
Bowman, yeah, Dr.
Yeah,
Bowman.
B-O-H.
Dr. Bowman. And he's been to the States. And our technology related to clips came from the Soviet Union, from the standpoint of thinking about the staple gun and all this kind of stuff. We took that from the Soviet Union. U.S. Surgical took that information, fine-tuned it, and created this new technology that they were using in the Soviet Union. But it was just really archaic. But anyway, that was a good experience doing that. Then I left. Wasn't cold enough in Chicago. Just wasn't cold enough. I was there the coldest day in the history of Chicago. I just left Dallas, Texas, and that winter I was living up in Highland Park, which is about an hour and 15 minutes down to the city to Rush. Rush out, I'm just driving down.
Michael Jordan.
Huh?
Next door to Michael Jordan.
Yeah, I was down. Michael was in the neighborhood. But anyway, we were driving down, and I drove and looked. And when you drive into Chicago off of the Eden, and then you hit the main strip going into Chicago, you're looking down on Chicago. And if it didn't look like Transylvania, I'd shoot you. It was about 5 o'clock in the morning, about 6 o'clock in the morning. I'm driving down, I'm out there, nothing was moving but me. And there was this fog coming above the city. And the temperature at that time was minus 65. That's what the wind chill factor, minus 65. But that's cold. We had a diesel, and and they had to plug that thing in. You know, diesel engines, diesel fuel was free, so you have to plug your cars in and all this stuff. And, you know, I'm coming from Dallas, 102, 105, 110, but you know, it was a good experience. I enjoyed my time there in Chicago, and we moved to Michigan. And what happened there, I really liked the practice. We had 5 GYN colleges, great, you know, partners were outstanding, all of them. We just did a lot of good stuff together. So it was like a great mentorship once I left fellowship to spend that 10 years just doing a variety of things. Stan Gall was at University of Illinois when I was director of, he was director of the perinatology, and he was going to leave Chicago and take over as a chairman at the University of Louisville. And Stan wanted me to go down to Louisville with him. So I went down and I looked at it. And I drove up and the thing said, the James Graham Cancer Center. That was the name of the cancer center. The James Graham, can you imagine James Graham going to the James Graham Cancer Center? But they had a fellow there from, I can't recall his name, he was from MD Anderson. He needed a partner. And I was just tired of being an Indian. I had to be the leader somewhere, so I said, my goodness, I've been an Indian all my life, you know, going up the level, resident, just continue to climb. So one day, sitting in my office having a bad day, I get a call from a headhunter, and he said, Doc, he said, I got a great position up here in Michigan, and I was rushed. And how would you like to come up and look at it? It's in Flint, Michigan. I mean, sure, send me the information. I just hung up and so forth. So one of my buddies there in Chicago was from Kalamazoo, and I told him, I said, well, this guy's sending me plane tickets to go up and look at Flint. He said, man, don't you go there. He said, haven't you seen Roger and Me? And that's, what's his name, the guy that, Moore, Roger Moore, I guess the Moore does all these things. He did a movie on Flint, and he had people eating rabbits and all this kind of stuff and so forth, how bad things were in Flint. So I said, well, they sent me the tickets. I mean, I'm going. So I went up there, and my God, unbelievable. Hurley Hospital. Oh, I didn't talk about these guys. That's the faculty there. Pretty much like University of North Carolina, campuses at different places. They have a Flint campus, Saginaw campus, campus at Grand Rapids. Grand Rapids had its GYN colleges. I was the GYN colleges for Flint and Saginaw, and Dr. Drucker, GYN colleges. It's always nice to have a chairman that's in your specialty. They look out for you. So Dr. Drucker was a GYN oncologist there at Sparrow Hospital in Lansing, and so he covered the Lansing area. We covered everything else. And good people, had a good time there and so forth. But I went to Hurley Hospital, 450-bed hospital, big place. But you got to remember, General Motors is the largest was at the time, the largest corporation in the country. All of their major execs were there in Flint. And they lived in palaces, an area called Miller Road. Just unbelievable, golf course and all. And they put so much money in the Hurley Medical Center. When I walked into that hospital, I'd been to Duke, Texas, Rush. I had never seen a cancer floor the way this cancer floor functioned in the hospital. ICU, everything was first class. They said, Dr. Graham, if you come here, we'll give you whatever you want. They let me sit down and have dinner with a couple of these execs. Had dinner that night, and they were talking about how great the city was, and they took me around and showed me all these various things. And I said, my goodness, this is unbelievable. Went back and came back to Chicago. I was in Bill. I said, you know, I like Chicago, even though I'm running like crazy. I mean, it's hard work. And but the advantage is if I were getting Flint, you would be 15 minutes away from the hospital, and you'd be able to do your own thing. So that's what I did. I didn't do it. My wife did it. But I was having trouble making the decision. So one afternoon I was driving home, Oh, what's that for sale sign doing in front of my house? I had taken her up there to see it as well. And she said, we are leaving Chicago, we are going to Flint, Michigan. I said, okay. So I went to Flint, Michigan. People thought I had lost my mind. How can you go to Flint from Chicago? You're a great group. And man, I went there, and I was the only GY oncologist in northern Michigan. I did, essentially, I had GOG and all that at Rush. So before I even went, I had the nurse to come that was going to be working with me in Flint to come up and spend, I guess, a couple of months just looking at GOG and getting that organized so I could do the GOG and so forth in Flint. So I went there and set that program up, and people that were leaving Traverse City, Cadillac, and all those places no longer needed to go down to Detroit. They would come to Flint. The hospital was supportive. They had a suite for my patients, for families when they came down. They needed surgeries, you know, big surgeries. Over in Tuma de Balkans, they put the family up free of charge. And I was the second leading producer in that hospital in a matter of a year. I had residents coming from all over the state to scrub. I had about 30, average 25, 30 patients in the house at all times. And so Lansing was sending me their residents. So I had 2 Lansing residents, 2 Flint residents, 2 one resident from Saginaw over by Port Huron resident. So I had about 6 or 7 residents under me caring for my patients because I was by myself. They knew I was working hard, cutting the first pelvic exoneration by myself with a resident, 12 hours. But we did it. The patient survived, but that was a tough operation. And, you know, most of the time you kind of divide it up. You got a couple of, I'm gonna do the bladder work, you do this. I'm gonna do this. I did it all. And it was just an amazing experience. And I survived because I had all this resident backup. And what I did, like when Dr. Addison came back to join Bill Priestman, there was a fellow in town who was a good guy. He always wanted to be a GY oncologist, done nothing but gynecology. So he said, you know what? He said, can I scrub in with you? So I trained him to help me in these major surgeries and coverage when I left town, things like this. So that worked out well. And then came Guy Borky. Guy was at Northwestern. His home was Flint, Michigan. He wanted to come back home. Lansing was recruiting him to go over there because Dr. Drucker was leaving. And so I saw him at a football game. He was from Flint. He got a divorce from his first wife. And his son, and my son and his son were on the same football team. So we were sitting in the thing, this guy taps me on the shoulder. Hello, are you James Graham? I said, yeah, I'm James Graham. I'm Guy Borky. I said, okay. I'm a GY oncologist. His mother was a nurse at the hospital, and she'd been telling me about him, so I'm going to be looking at Lansing. I said, why don't you come over and look at Flint? So he came over and looked at Flint. In 1995, he joined me as a GY oncologist. So that really took a lot of the weight off of things. But the Sadie D. Grimm Art Collection, cancer floor, huge cancer floor, and I helped finance this. But anyway, they wanted pictures on the wall in the cancer center representative of their patients. So they commissioned all of these artists from around the state to do this artwork for the cancer center. So this is Guy Borky and I here. That was the one painting the guy did of Guy and I looking at the CT scan. But anyway, he was a big laparoscopy guy. Laparoscopy was just coming into GY oncology and endometrial cancer. You know, patients I already mentioned, people in the Midwest are huge. And my largest patient was 1,500 pounds. 1,500, the largest, she was on CNN. And she was in the ICU and she had postmenopausal bleeding, so they wanted me to go in and do an evaluation. The only way they got her out of the home, they had to take a saw and cut she was in this room, and had to saw to cut the dang on room to get her out of the room. And I don't know how they got her to the hospital. 1,500 pounds. She was on CNN, they were talking about it. It was just amazing. But people in Michigan and Wisconsin are big. So Guy and I had a challenge. He came up there, you know, and everybody's big, so, you know, supposedly you don't do any laparoscopic endometrial nodes and all this stuff. If your BMI is over 35, the risk goes up significantly. Not Guy Borky. 40, 50, and I won't say 50, but we were doing them at 40, 42 endometrial cancers laparoscopically, and, you know, nodes and all this stuff. He had all these tech. So he brought something to the boy. He was good. The boy was good. And, but he wanted to work too hard because I just left Chicago doing all these hospitals. So he wanted us to go all over Michigan, Saginaw. They're going to put us up over at Lansing because Dr. Drucker was leaving, up in Pontiac. So we wanted to get back into that same thing I was doing in Chicago. And I said, "God, I can't do that, man." I said, "We're happy. We're making enough money. We got good patients. You know, why do we have to do all this running?" So, but that was in his agenda. So he left me after 5 years and went up to Saginaw. And now you up there, you know the story. But it was a good experience. And just a few other things. Right here, we had some fun there. This is a radiation therapist, Dr. Hackle. He was the director of radiation therapy in the area. This was Indy Anderson, trained surgical oncologist. That's me there. It's like McCain, even put on these Texas outfits on. So when you're in Egypt, they dress you up, all these galabeah. So we had this big party and everybody's dressed up. And Dr. Ackle's brother was the chief of the whole army. You know, he was 5-star general or whatever it was. And they wined and dined us for about 2 weeks there in Egypt. And down to Nile we went and all that stuff. We went to the hospitals and saw the healthcare system in the hospitals in Egypt. So that was a very nice trip. Dr. Cumler, chief of the chairman of the radiology department, and he was essentially they have a medical Indian association nationally, and a lot of Indians are in Flint, and a lot of Indians and Arabs, so it's a very mixed population of people there, and that was nice, you know. But anyway, he took us to India. And what they did in 5 years is incredible. He and 5 other Indian people. Southern India did not have a medical school. How big India is, got 1.2 billion people, second only to China. But down in Southern India, so he and 5 other Indian doctors, a couple of them from Chicago, the others from Flint, from the time of conception to the time of completion was 5 years. They had built a medical school in Southern India, and I was invited to go over with Dr. McCumlin to open up the medical school. We had the American Medical Association president, the International Medical Association president. It's a big deal. Open up this new hospital, and everybody had to give a presentation. So I talked to them, something related to GYN oncology, ovarian cancer, I guess. But it was very nice. We were over there for about 2 weeks and got to see that country firsthand, met with the prime minister, had dinner with him. He was high-powered there because, and that's where you hear about these institutions in India, like medical vacations, hospital for kidney transplants, hospital for heart transplant, hospital for orthopedics. And people leave this country, and India and Europe, go over there, and it's cheaper to have it done. And you actually, it's like a medical vacation, they called it. But it was wonderful. That was wonderful. And I was the president of what we call the Genesee County, is where Flint was, Afro-American Association, for about 5 years. And it was a mixed mix of Africans, Arabs, and blacks. Had about 30 or 40 physicians, and I served as president for a couple of years. This is one of our picnics that we were having. And then came Dan Clark Pearson. You know, it's tough being GYN oncology by yourself. For 12 years, I did GYN oncology alone. Okay, Guy Borky, 5 years. I was there for 17 years. I couldn't take any vacations. I went on vacation, I would round every day on the phone with my residents as to what was going on. And I did that for 12 years. And all of a sudden I get a call from Dan Clark Fisk in 2002, somewhere around 2002. Jim, how would you like to come back to Duke? Hallelujah! Saved. But anyway, came down, interviewed Dr. was it Haywood? Was the chairman. Oh, black chairman. My best friend, Central Inn Medicine. Shoe-in. But two things happened. That's another thing I never got clear on as to what happened there.
It was Arnie did. It was
Arnie again.
Okay. Things that happened to me over time. And that's why I quit early. I retired. People thought, you can't retire, you're too young. I say, well, watch me. But anyway, I developed hepatitis. Got pricked by a needle or something. Hepatitis C, I underwent a year, and Sadie wouldn't let me slow down. I was on interferon and vibratin for a year. Only about a 30% response rate, so obviously I didn't respond. So I went through that, it was just by myself, I just kept things going. And then I jogged in Chicago with big old boots and stuff like this, and played tennis with George. George and I were big tennis players, and racquetball, and on hard floors, 10, 12 hours, 3 days a week. I'll be at the operating room, and you know, you're operating, you're there for these cases alone, and I couldn't move. After I finished, oh my goodness, I'm hopping away from the operating table, and orthopedic guys know all about me, so they're sitting over there waiting for me in the doctor's lounge, and they daggone take out fluid and shoot some steroid in there, then I go back and operate. I said, how crazy is this? How crazy is this? I had opportunities to leave and go other places. California, they wanted to come out, Ed Savage to Drew Hospital. But I couldn't have made it out there. The kids and all that just wasn't the environment for me. But anyway, I just didn't do that. When I didn't go to Duke, and all these problems I was having, and looking at other places to go and so forth, and maybe I could do less work. And Sadie looked at me and said, you know what? You can retire. I said, what you mean? She said, everything's paid for. I said, you kidding? And partners for life. Our life has been a partnership in medicine ever since I met her in college. Our 50th anniversary was last August. 50 years of marriage. And this is my family. Got two sons and one daughter. Oldest son was a general surgeon over in Fort Wayne area. My daughter married a dentist right there. My other son is in Charlotte. He's the Casanova, 45 years old, and he's still playing the field. He hasn't slowed down yet. But anyway, I've spent, as I said, those 17 years in Flint, about 10 years in Chicago, and I just want to thank you, Mr. Duke, and particularly Dr. Parker, for giving me the opportunity to give this presentation. And my time at Duke, I really didn't experience any major, because I was focused. I knew what I wanted to do, and some things you're just naive. Things were happening around me, I just naive, they just roll off my back and wouldn't even think about them. And so I was tunnel vision. I knew what I had to do, what I went there to do, and I did it. And I'm happy. If I had to do it all over again, maybe I'd have to think twice if they said, well, why don't you just do dermatology? We'll accept you into our dermatology program. I have a buddy from Flint who was a dermatologist from Carolina, and he was our dermatologist there, and he was from the University of North Carolina, and he was a dermatologist. Boy, did he have a good lifestyle. Every weekend, anytime he wanted to take off, I tried to get my son to go into radiology or radiation therapy, anything that didn't happen. He said he just wanted to cut. A chance to cut is a chance to cure, Dad. I said, okay. So that's what he's doing. But anyway, that's my story, and I'm happy with the way things have turned out for me, and I'd do it all over again. But the other thing I said didn't understand is that what happened, you know, because what I was supposed to do at Duke was that I was supposed to go over to Duke Raleigh, because I had a practice set up in Durham, had the perfect model for me to go over there and set that proper practice over there in Durham, chemotherapy outpatient and all this stuff we were doing, and it didn't happen. So I couldn't figure. I would say, was it Haywood? Or is it because I told them, you know, what do you do when you have hepatitis C? Does that, you know, do you tell your patients you got hepatitis C? And I read all the literature on it. They say, well, you know, the likelihood of you transmitting the disease is very small. But if someone does develop it and you don't tell them that you've had it, how do you deal with that? Well, I ultimately got treated and was cured after this new Halvoni came out, but the government is strange. It was about $95,000 for one drug a day, Halvoni, for 3 months of treatment. Drug industry just gone crazy. So I had the choice of going into my savings and spending that 95, or just hoping that somewhere in the near future the government would approve it and Medicare would cover it. So Medicare started to cover it about 5 years ago. But you had to have cirrhosis first. If you got cirrhosis, then they'd pay that $95,000. But if you didn't, you had to pay for it yourself. And then finally the FDA approved it a couple of years ago. And had 3 months of treatment, no symptoms, boom, the virus was gone. But that's one of the reasons I retired early as well. I didn't want any stress in my life, so I was being stressed out. I had bad knees, bad ankles, bad hips, so it was time to go. So since age 57, I've been retired. The best move, the best time I've had in all my life. Grandkids, we go all over seeing them and taking them places. I play a lot of golf, I do some fishing, no stress. And, well, occasionally Sadie stresses me. You gotta do this, you gotta do that. But other than that, my life is stress-free. Thank you.